Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. So a slight change, I guess, in direction. So as John alluded to, I've spoken at this event, and it's in its London iteration a number of times. And previously, when I was an MOD civil servant, and I actually used to talk about a project that I was leading called the Defence Cyber Protection Partnership, which actually very neatly sort of brought together a couple of the presentations you've already heard this morning, particularly Emma's on IASME, because it was all around the cyber essentials and how defence particularly was looking to build on that. But I left government a couple of years ago and have been applying my trade subsequently in the private sector, lured away by obviously the lucrative offerings that can reside there. I'm now the Data Protection Officer at Camelot Group. Camelot Group run the National Lottery, for those of you who don't know. Well, interestingly, on my lanyard, it says I'm a Protection Officer, which might suggest I do some sort of close bodyguarding for celebrities, so slightly less exciting in reality. So Camelot Group is interesting. So the National Lottery obviously is a massive part of UK national life, a massive turnover, very high spend, very high profile, but actually run by a very lean organisation. And kind of it's my experiences being there, which has kind of been acted as the catalyst for developing this talk. And I just thought it might be interesting to share some of my experiences, and obviously some of those may resonate with some of you, and if not, they may resonate with your organisations and the people who are discharging the role that I'm doing. But we shall see. The other challenge I've got is everyone else has been trying to fit a 30-minute talk into 15 minutes. I seem to have a 30-minute slot, and I think I've only got a 15-minute slide. So hopefully that gives us longer for a Q&A when we get to that session. And hopefully it means I stick on green all the way through, but we shall see. So just a bit of a reminder, and this is all taken from the Information Commissioner's Office's website, who actually, under GDPR, who has to have a DPO. So there are 3 categories, which you can see on the screen. But additionally, a lot of organizations, even if you don't technically fall into one of these, may just choose to have a DPO, a Data Protection Officer. Because obviously everyone is subject to GDPR, or now the Data Protection Act 2018, as we move into the post-Brexit world. And obviously there are responsibilities that we have to organizations have to discharge under that, and actually it makes sense to have someone who is sort of notionally and nominally leading that response for you. But a data protection officer has a very sort of specific defined role, and as again set out here. So it's about monitoring compliance, advising, and that's a very key point, not necessarily directing, but advising on data protection obligations, and obviously acting as the contact point for both data subjects, the people whose data you are processing, and supervisory authority, Information Commissioner's Office in the case of the UK. And it's that role which kind of presents that challenge, because you are of the organisation, but you must be independent. You are there to represent, ultimately, I said, those interests of those data subjects. So how can you necessarily do that if you are part of the organisation and obviously supporting the aims and objects of the organisation? How can you be genuinely, independent and manage that challenge? And so, what does that mean for a lot of organisations? So you either have to, or you're choosing to have a data protection officer. So you may be in an organisation that's not small enough or does so little processing that it can avoid needing a DPO or choosing not to have one. And it may be that you choose not to take advantage of what does exist, which is DPO as a service. So there are organisations out there offering that. So effectively, as a small company, you say, well, I just want to have a part-time or a DPO service on a call-off contract that I can utilise, as and when I need it to come in. But you may feel that that's not the appropriate model for you. But you don't have the sufficient resources to have the luxury of having a full-time DPO, and who is that slightly detached, independent person, and also having the person who is maybe the full-time doer. So in some organisations, in big organisations, often called Chief Privacy Officer, but it could just be Head of Privacy, or however they may be badged. But as I said, the DPO is that second-line function. It is one step removed. It is assurance. It is independent. So if that is the case, how do you then simultaneously, if you don't have the luxury of both roles, how do you then also deliver that first line, doing, advising, directing function that organisations also need? So a couple of ways that potentially this could be done, and I'm not suggesting these are the only options, but one option is obviously you make the privacy person, the doer, your full-time. If you've only got one resource, you make them, the doer, and then you just appoint someone, from a senior person somewhere else in the organization to act as that independent DPO. But in that scenario, one would expect that the full-time privacy person probably has the greater expertise. So in all honesty, is it realistic that their activities can be effectively assured by someone who's just doing it as an add-on to probably an already busy and demanding role? Possibly, possibly not. It presents a challenge. So the alternative is you just go down we're just going to have a full-time DPO role, and then the onus is then on the DPO to manage that tension and manage that challenge. And I just want to go on to explore some of the ways that possibly can be done. So most importantly, if you find yourself in that scenario, I think you just have to be alive all the time to that potential conflict. Recognize that you are trying to balance off two sometimes competing objectives. Don't go native. It's something that's a bit of a glib term, but the temptation is to kind of to be there for the business and to support the business, because ultimately, obviously, they're paying your wages and you want them to succeed. But you have to remember that that is not the full extent of your role. But I also think it's important that if you focus on, people do get bogged down if you go onto LinkedIn and follow some of the data privacy, data protection sort of experts on there. People get very, very fixated on this idea that it's, the DPO must be independent and therefore there's no other way of doing it. But actually, I think you can avoid that if you focus on focus on outcomes, not on the process. So the process says they must be a separate entity. Well, actually, if you can find a way that you can manage that tension and you get the same outcomes, that ultimately is the important thing. I said I still think there's the opportunity. You can still set that strategic direction, and you can set the gold standard to the organization and say, right, this is how data protection and privacy and all personal data being processed in this organization, this is how this should be done. And then have that one step removed of assuring that they are then doing it properly. And I said, obviously, your role, it is to advise. It's not to direct. It's not to say, right, this is what we're going to do. This is to say, this is what you should do. And I draw parallels, and actually I sit in the legal team at Camelot, and I think it's a really useful way of positioning it, because actually that's what an in-house legal function does. It doesn't tell the business what it wants to hear, it tells the business what it needs to hear. I was sat yesterday watching one of my colleagues looking at the rough cut of an advert that had been made to go out on the TV, and basically saying to them, that can't go out, that does not comply with ASA guidelines. No, that's not what the business wanted to hear, because they've obviously spent quite a lot of money already making this advert. But it was what they needed to hear, because by telling them that, he's ensuring that we don't get ourselves into worse trouble somewhere down the track. And so it is also with the DPO. So you're not saying, right, yeah, of course you can do whatever it is you want to do. It's about saying, okay, that's what you want to do. However, these are the things you need to think about. I don't think it's about saying no. It's not a blocking function. It's an enabling function. It's saying, okay, I hear what you want to do. However, you need to understand that to do that in a compliant way involves you doing the following things, thinking about the following things, being transparent with the data subjects, etc., etc. And linked to that, ultimately, where you do give that advice, it is still ultimately the decision of the business whether they choose to listen to it or not. But if they choose not to, then they are owning that risk, and you document the fact that you advised a different course of action. And one of the things as a DPO, you are in this slightly nice position. You're actually, your role is protected, and actually you can't be sacked for giving advice that the business doesn't want to hear. So that is literally built into your job description. So you say what is what your advice is, this is what you believe is the compliant thing to do, and then the business makes a decision about whether they choose to do it. But if they choose not to, then they own that risk. You do not own that risk. And obviously they will accept, one hopes, and live with the consequences of choosing not to. Obviously, you don't expect that to be a scenario that arises, but it's just something to be alive to. I also think there's some more practical things that you can do, and this is a model that we're currently pursuing at the moment, and I know other organisations have done the same things, which is establishing a set of what we call privacy champions. So within our business, within each of the different teams, we're identifying someone, or we've asked for a person to be identified, who will act as that more first line role. So this is something that people are taking on in addition, again, to their day jobs, but we're asking that they are given the time and the space to be able to discharge that function. And they then become that first line. So they become that first point of contact for their area to go to and say, right, this is what we want to do, is this allowed, can we do this, and then they can work through that. Then I, as the DPO, act both as a sort of a reference point for advice where they need it, and also then I can then start establishing that distinction, and actually I can then go and say, when they've made decisions, I can make an assessment as to whether those decisions were the right things to do and assure their activities. And I said it's quite easy to think about all the negative things about the challenge of trying to discharge both these functions, but there are also some really good opportunities. So you have to build really good, strong relationships, and obviously one that's really relevant, hopefully, to the people in this room is obviously the relationship between the DPO and the CISO. Now, I know for some organisations, and again, this is a topic that gets discussed, is that a role that can be combined? And I think there's very good opportunities and potential reasons why it can be. Again, obviously, there is some tension because the CISO is rightly focused on protection of data, and that's a key part of the wider sort of GDPR, data protection and privacy agenda, but it's not the totality. Protecting information and being 100% as confident as one can ever be that it's adequately protected is great, but if you've got too much of it in the first place or you're retaining it for too long, then that's still a privacy violation. So there's still a tension here. So even if that is a double-hatted role, you need to have someone who can recognise that there are different facets to the two roles. But if they are separate, then an absolutely key relationship, and I'm very fortunate to work very closely with the CISO at Camelot. But obviously, and there are other key stakeholders, obviously, your legal team, your marketing people, particularly when you're getting into, e-marketing and all of the, what's called the PECA regulations, so privacy and e-communication regulation, which governs direct marketing electronically. But it also gives you an opportunity to really get to understand the business. What is it trying to do? What are its challenges? And get in there early, build those relationships, give early warning that things are coming down the line. I think a lot of organisations, again, hands up here, at a personal level, not asking you to put your hands up, the change in the cookie consent guidance that came out from the ICO. Now, everyone kind of knew that what most organisations were doing wasn't compliant, whereby, you just have a pop-up banner which says, by continuing to browse this website, you consent, etc., using implied consent. And then last July, the ICO suddenly announced, right, going forward, no, you need to have GDPR standard consent for to download cookies onto a user's browser and their device. And obviously, a lot of organisations have taken, are still taking a little while to get to the stage where they are now able to say they're compliant. And that's one example of where, earlier engagement with the business, just to warn them that something either, is coming or might be coming, possibly could have helped. And there's more activity happening around the whole area of ad tech and what's called real-time bidding, which is the way that when you visit a website, the choice of what adverts are served up to you. And obviously, I think we've all had that experience of you go and look up a hotel somewhere and then you go and visit some completely unrelated website and you just find that adverts are following you for that hotel and then following you around for the rest of your time on the web. So there's going to be more stuff going. So again, as a DPO, you've got that opportunity to share your learnings and your understanding with the wider business. And I think you just want to get to that stage where, the business is clear what good looks like. What is good data protection? What is good privacy practices? We're increasingly seeing organizations which are positioning themselves very deliberately as, with their stance on privacy being a differentiator in the marketplace. If you haven't seen it yet, but Apple have got a series of adverts running at the moment, based around what an iPhone doesn't do with the information that it captures about you. Whether you completely believe it is a different choice, but it's interesting that they are branding. It's literally apple.com/privacy. I think is the tagline. They are making that their selling point. Similarly, IKEA have just released a video which talks about their new approach to privacy and what they're doing in their app, which will giving much more power back to the data subjects, to the customer, even to the extent where you can set things like retention periods, how long you want certain bits of your personal data to be kept for. I think there's some interesting challenges there, and I'm not sure it's 100% working yet, but just it's an interesting idea that seems to be the direction that we're going in. It's something that has been talked about for a long time, that by being GDPR compliant, you'll steal a march on your competitors, but actually we're starting to see that actually translate certainly into marketing efforts. Whether it necessarily yet translates into business benefits, we'll obviously wait to see. And I think, if you have all of that early engagement, coming back to, your role as the DPO, then actually when you come to do your key function, which is that assurance activity, you are hopefully going to be in a much stronger place because you've communicated early what good looks like. You've engaged with the business, you've given them that early visibility of changes, so that actually when you do then go out and, okay, well, show me what you're doing, show me how long you're retaining data for, show me where you're, demonstrate you're only ever asking for the minimum data necessary for the purposes for which you're going to be doing processing. Hopefully you should find a much more positive experience at the outset, at the end of that. And I think do all of those things right, and hopefully your 2 or more hats and look remarkably stylish. So, thank you very much.